Hello and welcome to WION World is One. You're watching Gravitas with me, Hemkor Saroya. It's the 24th of April 2024. The war in Gaza is now 200 days old. And tonight we have questions that must be answered. Who tied the hands of those who were found buried in Gaza's mass graves? Who stripped the bodies? The United Nations is asking these questions. Hence, we must ask them. The United States, which is the strongest ally of Israel, is asking these questions. Hence, we are asking tonight, who tied the hands of those found buried in Gaza's mass graves? No one deserves to be denied dignity in death, but that's what's happened in Gaza. This is a heartbreaking story, one I'm afraid you must know. Mass graves have been found at two hospitals in Gaza. The first one is the Al-Nasser Hospital. This is in Khan Younis in central Gaza. The second is the Al-Shifa Hospital. This is in Gaza City, in the north of the enclave. 283 bodies were recovered at the Nasser Hospital. 42 of them were identified. Now, this used to be Gaza's second largest hospital. Now it's a graveyard. The hospital came under attack in February. First, it was shelled, then raided. The Israeli army ordered everyone inside Nasser Hospital to evacuate. At that time, the hospital had not just the wounded and other patients who were receiving treatment. There were also displaced people who were taking refuge inside the medical facility. The hospital was under siege for one whole week. Stranded inside were patients, their family members, caretakers, hospital staff and refugees. The Israeli army withdrew from Nasser Hospital on the 22nd of February. On the 7th of April, the IDF withdrew from Khan Younis. Palestinian emergency teams started digging the hospital compound. They found mass graves in the hospital courtyard. Among the dead were the elderly, women and the wounded. Some bodies were found with their hands tied and stripped of their clothes. Something similar happened at the Al-Shifa Hospital. This used to be Gaza's largest medical facility. Israeli troops raided this hospital. The first raid was in November 2023. The hospital building was heavily damaged, as a result of which the facility stopped functioning. In January then, the IDF claimed it had dismantled Hamas's command structure in northern Gaza. But in March, the IDF decided to raid Al-Shifa again. Israeli forces said they were conducting quote-unquote precise operational activities against terrorists. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza said that some 300 people were sheltering in Al-Shifa at the time of the raid. This was a 2-week-long siege. When the troops withdrew, UN workers went into the hospital. They said the hospital was reduced to, and I'm quoting again, an empty shell. Most of the equipment has become ashes. Now, 2 mass graves have been found in the courtyard of Al-Shifa. The first one is in front of the hospital's emergency building. The second is in front of the dialysis building. In total, 30 bodies have been found buried. 12 have been identified. Here too, hands of some of these bodies were tied. Who did this? Who tied the hands? Who stripped the bodies? The United Nations says it's horrified. It says at both the hospitals, the bodies were found buried deep in the ground and they were covered with waste. The UN is calling for an independent, effective and transparent investigation. The UN Human Rights Commission wants international investigators to step in. It is said, and I'm quoting again, let's be clear, the intentional killing of civilians, detainees and others who are asked to combat in a war crime. It refers to those who are incapacitated or out of action during a war because of injuries. It's French for out of combat. The story of Gaza's mass graves is echoing in power corridors around the world. The UN says it feels the need to raise an alarm because of impunity and serious violations of international human rights law passing under the radar. The Palestinian civil defense that dug out these bodies says some of the dead were killed by the Israeli army during the siege. The others were buried before the siege. Israel rejects these allegations. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, is calling the claims baseless and unfounded. The IDF claims that during its operations near the Nasser Hospital, Israeli troops examined the corpses that were already buried there. The IDF statement reads, I'm quoting here, the examination was conducted in a careful manner and exclusively in places where intelligence indicated the possible presence of hostages. The examination was carried out respectfully while maintaining the dignity of the deceased. The United States has expressed concern. U.S. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel said, and I'm quoting again, the reports are incredibly troubling and we're inquiring on this with the government of Israel. You see, this is not a story of claims and counterclaims. This is a story of serious human rights violations. It is about robbing people of their dignity in death. This is a story of accountability. You cannot get away with abusing innocent people. Even in times of war, there is a red line that you cannot, and I repeat, you cannot cross. Tying hands, stripping bodies, dumping them in mass graves, covering them with waste. How can someone be so inhuman? You know what's scary? The story is not over. The United Nations says there could be many more such bodies. Moving on now. China is showing off to the United States its war muscle against Taiwan. Here's what I mean. Just this week, China has sent military aircraft and ships near Taiwan. It has opened 2 new air routes with flight paths near outlying islands of Taiwan. It has also flaunted its nuclear second strike capability by releasing a rare footage of its JL-2 ballistic missile. Now you'd think all this is in preparation of invasion of Taiwan. It is, but it is also perfectly timed. China was flexing its military muscle in the Taiwan Strait at a time when it was also preparing to host the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. On Wednesday, Blinken arrived in China. This is his first visit to China since last June, when the United States was trying to restore engagement with China following the spy balloon incident. Since then, friction between the two countries, tensions have eased, but reports say Blinken is expected to raise a number of other hot-button issues, including concerns related to South China Sea with the Xi Jinping government. But while America hopes to ease tensions with China, tensions around Taiwan continue to loom large. You see, earlier this week, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense said that it had detected 21 Chinese military aircraft as well as 7 naval vessels around the country. According to Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense, of the 21 PLA aircraft, 14 crossed the Taiwan Strait median line. 3 of them entered the southwest corner of Taiwan's air defense identification zone, and 2 were detected in the northeast of the air defense identification zone. In response, Taiwan sent aircraft and naval ships, deploying air defense missile systems to monitor the PLA activity. Earlier on Saturday, Taiwan also detected 21 Chinese military aircraft, including the Shenyang J-16 fighter jets, Shanxi Y-8 transport aircraft and drones, of which 17 crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese planes either crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait or entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone, in tandem with patrolling activities carried out by Chinese military vessels in the areas. In response to this breach by China, Taiwan said that they were closely monitoring the situation, dispatching appropriate assets to respond to the situation accordingly. Now, overall, Taiwan has tracked Chinese military aircraft 193 times, naval ships 125 times just this month. China's increased activity in the Taiwan Strait, it's not new. We've been seeing this since September 2020. It's called grey zone tactics. It refers to China's effort beyond steady state deterrence and assurance that attempts to achieve one's security objectives without resorting to direct and sizable use of force. Simply put, China is incrementally increasing the number of ships that it sends around Taiwan. You see, the median line of the Taiwan Strait has for decades served as a tacit border. But the Chinese military has more flagrantly sent aircraft, warships and drones across the line. Since former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August 2022. What's more, just 2 days before Blinken arrived in Shanghai, China also showed off its nuclear second strike capability. It's the ability to hit back after an enemy launches an initial nuclear attack. As I mentioned earlier, Beijing released rare footage of the launch of a JL-2 ballistic missile from a nuclear submarine. The video shows China's Shandong aircraft carrier fleet, including 4 submarines, during a simulated exercise. While this video does not identify the type of missile or the type of submarine, experts identified it as the JL-2 submarine-launched ballistic missile. China first unveiled it in 2019 during a Chinese military parade. Reports tell us that the JL-2, it has a range of 7,400 kilometers. Compared with land-based missiles, generally these allow for a greater chance of surviving an initial strike by an enemy and conducting a second strike then. If China deploys it in the mid-Pacific Ocean, it can threaten targets in the western half of the continental United States, as well as Hawaii and Alaska. This video was released to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Chinese Navy. It is the first confirmation that the Shandong Carrier Strike Group includes at least 4 submarines, including a nuclear one. For China, its show of strength serves many purposes. For one, China hopes that Taiwan will be intimidated. Remember, Beijing considers Taiwan its breakaway province, even though Taiwan sees itself as completely distinct from China. Beijing has vowed to unite Taiwan with the mainland by force if necessary. The other reason China continues to flex its military muscle is to challenge America's military might. After all, China's expansionism does not stop at Taiwan. It uses its grey zone activities in the East and the South China Sea to expand its power and substantiate its hawkish territorial claims. Experts agree that China is primed to invade Taiwan as soon as 2027. All signs point to it. In recent years, it has amassed ships, planes, missiles, submarines. Perhaps the real question is, will America be able to protect Taiwan if China does invade? And in the swirling tempest of today's geopolitics, confrontations aren't just confined to land and sea. No. They're stretching their long arms towards the starry skies above. The world is witnessing the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the war between Israel and Hamas. And it appears that terrestrial battles seem poised to vault into the boundless realm of outer space. Now, today the United Nations Security Council, it braces for what may be a significant confrontation between Russia and the United States. It is all set to vote on a resolution which will call on countries to prevent an arms race in outer space. On one hand, the United States is spearheading an initiative to avert an arms race in space. Russia, on the other hand, is expected to block this resolution. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, though. Let me first tell you about the said initiative in question. The United States, it's hoping to reiterate the principles of the Outer Space Treaty. It's a landmark treaty established in 1967. The objective of this treaty is to promote the peaceful exploration of space. It strictly prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons or any other types of weapons of mass destruction in orbit. It's also important to note here that both Russia and the United States are signatories to it. The resolution encourages all nations to actively participate in ensuring that outer space remains a realm dedicated to peaceful pursuits. To no one's surprise here, the path to passing this resolution is perceived to be fraught with challenges. Enter China and Russia, who are expected to oppose the US move. See, China and Russia view this Western-led international agreement with suspicion. This effort is perceived as one that will only further the United States' influence. Adding another layer of complexity, the United States has accused Russia of developing an anti-satellite weapon with nuclear capabilities intended for deployment in space, a claim Russia strongly denies. This accusation, it has added fuel to fire, intensifying discussions around the militarization of space. Now, in an attempt to garner support, US Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield and Japan's UN Ambassador Yamazaki Kazuyuki have engaged in 6 weeks of intense negotiations with other Security Council members on the resolution's draft text. Now, despite these efforts, a Russian veto seems likely, underscoring the deep divisions and the high stakes in the space age standoff. As the international community watches these developments, the upcoming vote at the United Nations Security Council isn't just about a single resolution. It's about shaping the future of space governance and ensuring that space remains a frontier for peaceful exploration and cooperation. The decisions made now could set precedential norms for how space is used for generations to come. All right, let's also take a look at what else we have lined up for you on the show tonight. Is Rahul Gandhi loyalist Sam Pitroda BJP's best friend? We'll discuss this in our next report. Also coming up on the show is a new energy war breaking out in the South China Sea. We tell you how Chinese aggression has been flipping the energy economies of Vietnam and the Philippines. United States is threatening sanctions on Pakistan. We bring you the whole story on the show tonight. Also, teachers in Tennessee can now carry guns to school. What gives? Stay with us as we bring you this bizarre story from the Wild West. All right, let's shift our focus to India, where a multi-phase election is currently underway. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi-led Bharatiya Janata Party seeks a third term, the opposition parties appear to have much ground to make up. The Indian National Congress, which is seeking to unseat the Modi government, may have just scored a self-goal in this crucial election. A senior party leader's comments about inheritance tax in the United States have added fuel to an ongoing debate over wealth distribution in India's politically charged election season. This has left the grand old party of India red-faced. It's given the BJP fresh ammo to attack the Congress. Here's what happened. A huge political row broke out after Congress leader Sam Pitroda said that India should discuss bringing a similar policy to the inheritance tax in the United States, where the government takes a certain percentage of a person's wealth after his death. While the United States has no federal inheritance tax, half a dozen states in the country such as Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Nebraska, New Jersey and Pennsylvania do have such laws on their books. This tax, it depends on the amount of the inheritance and the relationship to the dead. This tax is only applied above a certain threshold and can go up to nearly 20% of the inheritance. India has no such inheritance tax. The levy was abolished by the Rajiv Gandhi government in 1985, but Pitroda's example of inheritance tax in the United States, that's added fuel to a fire that the Congress has been trying to douse since Prime Minister Modi raised the issue at a rally a few days ago. In recent election rallies, the Indian Prime Minister has alleged that the Congress, it plans to conduct a survey and put into motion a wealth redistribution plan. He has also claimed that property and jewelry owned by citizens would be surveyed, taken away and redistributed. After the Congress leader's remark, Prime Minister Modi once again told a poll rally that Congress's dangerous intentions are coming out in the open. He told voters that the opposition party plans to tax inheritance passed down from parents to their children.
शाही परिवार के शाहजादे के सलाहकार ने कुछ समय पहले कहा था, और ये परिवार उन्हीं की बात मानता है कि हमारा देश का जो मिडिल क्लास है, मध्यम वर्गीय लोग हैं, जो मेहनत करके कमाते हैं, उन्होंने कहा उन पर ज्यादा टैक्स लगना चाहिए। अब कांग्रेस का कहना है कि वो इनहेरिटेंस टैक्स लगाएगी।
So the BJP describes Sam Pitroda's comment as a sign that the Congress party, if voted to power, will redistribute the wealth of Indians.
कांग्रेस पार्टी सैम पित्रोड़ा के बयान के बाद कंप्लीटली एक्सपोज हो गई। सैम पित्रोड़ा जी के बयान ने कांग्रेस का मकसद देश के सामने स्पष्ट कर दिया है।
Now, the BJP also alleged that the Congress manifesto, it promises to seize and redistribute the wealth of Indians. What does the Congress have to say about this? For starters, it has denied these allegations. In its manifesto for the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, the Congress makes several statements regarding income inequality, India's wealth, people belonging to economically weak sections, and the allocation of government land and resources. The manifesto says Congress will conduct a nationwide socio-economic and caste census to enumerate the castes and sub-castes and their socio-economic conditions. Based on this data, Congress promises to strengthen the agenda for affirmative action. It's under the section called Nyay Patra or Justice Letter in English, but nowhere in its manifesto does the Congress say that it will seize the wealth from the rich and distribute it among the poor. Yes, the party promises a caste census to gather data and accordingly implement affirmative action policy. Party leader Rahul Gandhi has called this census plan an X-ray of India, which the party believes will aid them in policy making. Several Congress leaders have come out and clarified that there are no plans of seizing and redistributing wealth. The party has also filed a complaint, in fact, with the Election Commission, highlighting Prime Minister Modi's speech. As far as Sam Pitroda's statements are concerned, the party has tried to distance itself from it. Congress says that Pitroda's comments do not reflect the party's position. But Pitroda's recent remarks have nonetheless forced the party into firefighting mode. Congress General Secretary had this to say.
He makes these comments in the US, he's made these comments in the US, while he's free to say whatever he has to say on issues on which he feels strongly, it's not always that he reflects the views of the Indian National Congress. And on this particular issue also, he's not reflecting the official position of the Indian National Congress.
All right, hitting back at the BJP, senior Congress leader Pawan Kheda has asked this, and I'm quoting here, has he, Pitroda, said the Congress will bring this policy? Has the Congress said it in its manifesto? Is discussing and debating different ideas not allowed in this ancient land as controversy over his statement snowballed? Pitroda himself issued a clarification. He said on X, formerly Twitter, I'm quoting here, it's unfortunate that what I said as an individual on inheritance tax in the United States is twisted by Godi media to divert attention from what lies Prime Minister is spreading about Congress manifesto. Prime Minister's comments, Mangal Sutra and gold snatching, simply unreal. As the election heats up, the Congress party is finding it challenging now to keep up with the BJP's momentum. The BJP's campaigning led by Prime Minister Modi, it's been successful in winning over voters across the country. With his initial comment, Congress's Pitroda may have just served his rival party's agenda, proving once again that self-serving politics do not help parties win voters. The question on everyone's mind is, has Pitroda inadvertently given the potential political advantage to the ruling party? Has the Rahul Gandhi loyalist become BJP's new best friend? Let's shift our focus now. Is an energy war breaking out in the South China Sea? China is fighting Vietnam and the Philippines. It's trying to keep the countries from developing energy reserves that are not even in the Chinese territory or anywhere close to it. One example begins in 2011. That year, energy was discovered off the coast of Vietnam. It was almost 150 billion cubic meters of fuel. This was enough energy to provide electricity to a city the size of Hanoi for over 20 years. The reserve was just 80 kilometers from Da Nang. It was in the Cao Shan field, or what's called the Blue Whale. What did Vietnam do? ExxonMobil was leading the drilling. So Vietnam asked the American oil giant to lead the Blue Whale project. ExxonMobil was to construct an offshore platform, a pipeline connecting the reserve to the shore, an onshore gas treatment plant, and finally, pipelines that could supply the gas to 4 power plants in Vietnam. The power plants were identified. 2 of them were in Shulai, 2 in Shuangai. The Philippines was watching the developments closely. The newly discovered oil reserve was not all that far from the island nation's western coast. So for long, Manila had eyed the energy reserves in this part of the South China Sea. It hoped that such a discovery could reduce Manila's reliance on imported energy. Now, the Cao Shan gas field was in Vietnam's exclusive economic zone. For Vietnam, this discovery meant economic growth. The energy would generate $20 billion in revenue for Vietnam. It would also reduce the cost of power by 20%. Now, that's a lot. What's more, the Blue Whale project would help Vietnam's industrialization and its socio-economic development. But as work was underway, Vietnam's dreams were shattered by China. We've been telling you about China's 9-dash line, or what's now become the 10-dash line. China claims almost all of the South China Sea. The Blue Whale was no exception. In order to deter Vietnam from developing the reserve, Beijing unleashed its maritime militia and the Monster. The Monster. It's a 12,000-ton Chinese petrol vessel. It's fitted with anti-aircraft guns. The Monster has massive fuel storage capacity, and this enables the vessel to undertake extended missions. China ensured that every now and then the Monster sailed around the waters of Vietnam, especially the energy-rich parts. This was China's way of dominating these waters. Also sending a message to Vietnam that its ships cannot possibly compete with Chinese monster ships. Chinese boats then began clashing with their Vietnamese and Filipino counterparts. In 2014, Chinese ships began ramming and firing water cannons at Vietnamese boats that were trying to stop China from putting an oil rig in the South China Sea. In 2019 then, a Chinese ship rammed and sank a Vietnamese fishing vessel. Between 2014 and 2022, Chinese vessels destroyed 98 Vietnamese boats. On the 5th of March then, 2 Chinese Coast Guard vessels fired water cannons at a Philippine port. It was a resupply vessel that was headed to the second Thomas Shoal. A lot is also happening behind the scenes here. Reports say a leaked US diplomatic cable revealed that US energy giant Chevron was forced to suspend its operations in Vietnam in 2007, and this was after the company received a warning from Beijing. Over the years, projects involving BP and Spanish company Repsol have also been suspended. You see, Vietnam is the 3rd largest holder of crude oil reserves in Asia, behind China and India. Vietnam has natural gas, also petroleum. The Philippines too has 3.5 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. All of the natural gas that Philippines produces is consumed domestically. Chinese aggression has now come in the way of the 2 countries trying to explore and develop more energy sources. Experts say Chinese aggression has flipped the energy economies of Vietnam and the Philippines. These countries are now relying on imports. They aren't really being able to develop their own supplies. Vietnam was supposed to start reaping the benefits of the Blue Whale project this year. Instead, Vietnam imported its first shipment of liquefied natural gas this year. Same with the Philippines. Bloomberg reports that Vietnam is expected to spend as much as $370 million on LNG by September 2025. For the Philippines, this number is at $1.4 billion. But things appear to be changing. Earlier this year, Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. visited Hanoi. The two countries signed agreements for cooperation in the South China Sea. The Coast Guard of the two countries will now be working together to prevent incidents in disputed waters. Vietnam and the Philippines appear to be standing up to China. How is Beijing reacting to all of this? The Philippines Navy says that 124 Chinese vessels have been detected in the West Philippine Sea since the start of the Balikatan activities this week. The Philippines is conducting joint military exercises with the United States. You see, countries have started challenging Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. Unprecedented drills are being held. Summits are being held in the White House. Countries are spending on defense. War machines are being moved around. The waters of the South China Sea are getting increasingly militarized. Is this development signaling towards the start of a new energy war? That's the question. The United States, it's issued a stern warning to Pakistan. It's threatened to impose sanctions if Pakistan does business with Iran. This comes as Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi wraps up his three-day visit to Pakistan. The two Muslim neighbors are trying to mend ties after cross-border strikes that happened earlier in the year. During his visit, Raisi vowed to boost trade with Islamabad. But the United States isn't taking it too well. Our next report brings you all the details.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi was in Pakistan for a three-day visit. Economic ties, border relations and energy ties were on the agenda. Most importantly, the visit was meant to mend relations between the two neighbors on the heels of the tit-for-tat strikes that happened earlier in the year. As the Muslim neighbors tried to make up, the United States appears to have been irked. It is threatening to impose sanctions. US State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel has said, and I quote, "We advise anyone considering business deals with Iran to be aware of the potential risk of sanctions, but ultimately the government of Pakistan can speak to their own foreign policy pursuits." End quote. Why is the West angry? The answer is threefold. 1. A range of Iranian businesses, people and institutions already carry US sanctions. Dealing with them can also trigger US sanctions. 2. America's focus could particularly be on a particular gas pipeline project, one that is meant to connect Iran's South Pars gas field to Pakistan. The project was supposed to take off decades ago. Iran says it has invested around $2 billion to construct the pipeline on its side of the border. But Pakistan could not give the project a final green light. It was afraid to attract US sanctions for dealing with Iran. Last month, Pakistan reportedly indicated that it would try to seek a sanction waiver from the US. Cut to what happened just days ago. US sanctioned 4 firms, 3 Chinese and 1 from Belarus. These companies were accused of supplying equipment to Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile program. Washington said that these sanctions were part of America's efforts to disrupt and target the proliferators of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. For decades, the US has also been suspicious of Iran's nuclear program. Is Iran building a bomb, or is it not? The West isn't sure. In the backdrop of such uncertainty, the bonhomie between Iran and Pakistan has clearly not gone down well with the US. On their part, Iran and Pakistan have inked as many as 8 memoranda of understanding for collaborating in various areas. The neighbors agreed to increase trade to $10 billion over the next 5 years. They also accused the finalization of the Pakistan-Iran gas pipeline project. The talks revolved around completing Pakistan's portion of the pipeline and exploring loopholes to evade the sanctions. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now, for the last 1 month, we've been continuously telling you about war stories. How did that make you feel? You may have formed your opinion. Some things might have angered you. Some things may have made you sad. So how do you express those emotions? There has to be some outlet for them, isn't it? So where do you share your views and opinions? I'm asking this because it seems social media, college campuses, work cliques are now off limits. At any given point, you could be cancelled for your views. I'm not just saying that, there's a growing trend here. I'll give you the facts soon. People are being sacked over their opinions. Look at what's happening in Ivy League colleges. Students of the Columbia University have been protesting against Israel for the Gaza war. They've been camping on the campus for the last 1 week. But the university has asked them to clear their encampments. Today, 8 a.m. US time, that was the deadline to do it. But it has been extended by another 48 hours. There's been a wave of arrests and suspensions of protesters. And this is happening in the United States, the same country which vouches for freedom of expression and peaceful protests. But here it is cracking down on pro-Palestine protests. Student protesters from Columbia University have claimed that at one point 50 police officers from the force's strategic response group lined up outside the campus building. They say the response has been more severe than ever before. It has reached a point where the university had suspended in-person classes altogether. Meanwhile, at Yale, police officers arrested about 45 protesters, charged them with misdemeanor trespassing. This happened after protesters set up tents over the weekend and called on Yale to end investments in defense companies that do business with Israel. At Harvard, the Harvard Undergraduate Palestine Solidarity Committee has been suspended. The entire support group has been disbanded. At a time when there is a war going on, the group wrote in a statement, I'm quoting here, Harvard has shown us time and again that Palestine remains the exception to free speech. Why is this happening? As long as the opinions aren't threatening someone's safety, why are they being suppressed? These colleges admit the creme de la creme of students. Do they expect these young minds to not have any political opinions? And speaking of creme de la creme, consider what's happening at Google. In the last 7 days, as many as 50 employees have been fired. This has happened after the workers protested against Google's cloud computing deal with the Israeli government. Earlier, CEO Sundar Pichai had told employees in a memo that they should not use the company as a personal platform or fight over disruptive issues or debate politics. Google says that each worker it fired actively disrupted its offices. The workers dispute these claims. They claim that some did not even enter the company's office the day of the demonstrations. All in all, the situation has escalated into a public fight between Google managers and the fired employees. Pichai said that the company's openness was a strength, but it applied only to work topics, not politics. The question is, can it really work like that? And a glimmer of hope has emerged for Ukraine in its ongoing war with Russia. US President has signed the $61 billion military aid package that offers a lifeline to a nation struggling to hold its ground. But can the new weapons reach in time for the Ukrainian front lines under intense Russian assault? Our next story explores.
Russian missiles damaged residential buildings and injured 6 people in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, the latest target of a fierce Russian onslaught. These are images from the Black Sea port of Odessa, where Ukraine says a Russian drone attack injured 9 people. While shipment details are classified, Ukraine urgently needs artillery shells to stop advancing Russian troops and anti-aircraft missiles to protect people and infrastructure from missiles, drones and bombs.
On the front line, people mostly need shells, different kind of calibers, and they also need some aviation bombs, guided bombs and stuff like that to oppose, because Russians are preparing for the counteroffensive, and we need massive stuff to stop them.
The Russian army is slowly gaining ground against the outgunned Ukrainians. as they struggled to hold them back amid fears of a deadly Russian summer offensive. Earlier this week, Russia claimed control of a settlement near Chasiv Yar, a strategic town located on high ground that could open the way for a Russian advance on several fortress cities in eastern Ukraine. Residents of the frontline villages close to the border of Donetsk Oblast have a different worry: unexploded ordnance and booby traps left behind by retreating Russian troops.
A lot of soldiers and civilians have been killed stepping on mines here, on anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, on stretchers. You can't count them on your fingers anymore.
The American aid will bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities with much-needed artillery shells and anti-aircraft missiles. Experts believe that exhausted after 2 years of war, neither Ukraine nor Russia can mount a major offensive, one capable of making big strategic gains till next year. Zelensky insists Ukraine's war aim is to recapture all its territory from Russia, including Crimea that it seized in 2014. Even if the war ultimately ends through negotiation, as many experts believe it will, Ukraine wants to do it from a strong position. But on an unreliable battlefield, Ukraine faces many variables that are beyond its control. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, shifting our focus to the Wild West now. How is the United States dealing with its mass shootings? With children bringing guns into classrooms? The answer is simple: not by tightening the gun laws, but by arming the teachers instead. The Tennessee legislature has passed a bill that would allow teachers and school staffers to now carry concealed handguns in schools. All they need is 40 hours of training in school policing to qualify. The identity of the teacher or staffer who's carrying a gun would not be made public. It's as bizarre as it sounds. The bill was approved with a 68-28 majority in the Republican-dominated Tennessee House. The state Senate passed the bill earlier this month. My question is, how is this even a solution? How do you tackle the gun problem? Certainly not by throwing more guns into the mix. The United States, it's a country that has more firearms than people. About half of all states in the United States allow teachers or other school employees to carry firearms on school grounds. But has it stopped the mass shootings? No, it hasn't. Then how is introducing this law going to help? And do you know what the worst part is? If things go south, nobody is going to be held accountable. Under the legislation, school districts and law enforcement agencies would be immune from any claims of damages. Whether a teacher intentionally carries out a shooting or a student is accidentally shot. The bill does not provide a framework for the state to track how many teachers are armed and where. It doesn't lay out any protocol for dealing with the teacher involved in shooting either. There is no word on where these guns will be stored. How will parents be comfortable with this idea that their kid is spending good 7 to 8 hours a day at a place where people are roaming around with guns in their bags, that too legally? Sounds like a situation ripe for accidents or misuse. That being said, we end our show tonight on a positive note. It's a story of hope in the shadow of conflict. It's the story of an Indian heart giving new life to a young woman from Pakistan. 19-year-old Aisha Rashan was admitted to a hospital in southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu with a severe heart dysfunction. Following her heart failure, Aisha was put on ECMO. It's a form of life support for people with life-threatening illness or injury affecting the function of heart or lungs. However, her heart pump developed a leak in a valve, which necessitated a full heart transplant. The donor heart came from India's capital, New Delhi. Aisha was lucky. She was able to receive the heart fast, as there were no competing claims. Usually, it's a lot more difficult for a foreigner to get an organ this fast. Typically, a heart transplant can cost over 35 lakh rupees. Her family said that they could not afford the operation, and that's when doctors as well as the medical trust stepped in, covering all of the expenses. This remarkable story is a shining example of the fact that when people come together with love and warmth, no borders can hold us back from helping those in need. All right, before we wrap up this edition of Gravitas, here's a look at Gravitas images.
最高水位的时候